The November rain was hammering against the windows of the Metropolitan Police Department's cold case unit when Detective Marcus Thompson received the call that would change everything he thought he knew about the Rebecca Martinez case. He was sitting at his desk in Lower Manhattan, reviewing files from a string of unsolved disappearances from the early 2020s, when his phone rang. "Detective Thompson, this is Park Ranger Susan Walsh from the Adirondack Park Preserve upstate. We found something you need to see. It's about that missing reporter, Rebecca Martinez." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Rebecca Martinez, the 34-year-old investigative journalist for the New York Tribune who had vanished without a trace on October 15, 2021, while working on what she had called the biggest story of her career. Her editor claimed she had been investigating some kind of corporate conspiracy, but Rebecca had been secretive about the details, even with her closest colleagues. "What did you find, Ranger Walsh?" "Her microcassette recorder. A hiker discovered it in a waterproof case buried under some rocks near Lake Placid. The case has her name engraved on it, and inside—" Walsh paused. "Detective, there are recordings on this thing that don't make any sense. You need to hear them." 3 hours later, Marcus was driving north on the New York State Thruway, watching the city skyline fade into rolling hills and autumn forests. The Adirondack region was a world away from Manhattan, 6 million acres of wilderness where cell phone signals died and people could disappear for weeks without anyone noticing. Ranger Walsh met him at the Park Service headquarters in Ray Brook, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who looked like she'd spent her entire life outdoors. She led him into a small office and placed an evidence bag on the desk between them. "The hiker who found this is a local guy, been coming to these woods for 30 years. Says he's never seen that rock formation before, like someone had deliberately created a cairn to mark the spot." Marcus examined the recorder through the plastic evidence bag. It was a Sony TCM 200DV, a professional-grade microcassette recorder that investigative journalists often used for interviews. The nameplate read R. Martinez, NY Tribune, in neat block letters. "Have you listened to the recordings?" Ranger Walsh nodded grimly. "Only the first one. That was enough to convince me this needed to go to you folks in the city. Detective, what I heard on that tape, it doesn't match anything in the official missing person report." "How so?" "According to your files, Rebecca Martinez was investigating corporate malfeasance, right? Some kind of business story? That's what her editor told us." "Why?" Walsh hit play on the cassette player. Rebecca Martinez's voice, clear and professional despite some background static, filled the small office. "October 12, 2021. This is Rebecca Martinez, investigative correspondent for the New York Tribune. I'm beginning what I believe will be my final series of interviews regarding Project Mindbridge. 3 years of research have led me to believe that the disappearances in the Adirondack region are not random, and they are not accidents. There is a pattern and there is a purpose." Marcus paused the recording. "Project Mindbridge? That wasn't in any of our files. There are 6 more tapes, Detective, each one stranger than the last." The drive back to Manhattan gave Marcus time to think about what he'd heard. Rebecca Martinez hadn't been investigating corporate fraud. She'd been looking into missing persons cases in the Adirondacks, cases that, according to her preliminary notes, showed signs of being connected to some kind of government research project. Back at his desk, Marcus pulled up Rebecca's missing person file. The official report stated that she had been working on a story about pharmaceutical companies and their pricing practices. Her editor, David Chen, had told investigators that Rebecca had become increasingly paranoid in the weeks before her disappearance, claiming that her phone was being tapped and that she was being followed. But now Marcus had evidence that Rebecca had been investigating something entirely different, something that had apparently gotten her killed. He decided to start with David Chen. The New York Tribune occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The newsroom was exactly what Marcus expected. Rows of cubicles filled with reporters typing frantically, the constant buzz of conversations and ringing phones, and the general sense of organized chaos that characterized most newspaper operations. David Chen was a thin, nervous man in his early 40s who looked like he hadn't slept well in months. When Marcus showed him his badge and mentioned Rebecca's name, Chen's face went pale. "Detective, I told the investigators 3 years ago everything I knew about Rebecca's story. She was working on pharmaceutical pricing, got too deep into corporate conspiracies, and apparently had some kind of breakdown. Mr. Chen, I need you to listen to something." Marcus played the first 30 seconds of Rebecca's recording. Chen's reaction was immediate and telling. He looked genuinely shocked. "I've never heard that before. Rebecca never mentioned anything about missing persons or project, what did she call it? Mind Bridge. Are you saying she never discussed this investigation with you? Detective, Rebecca was one of my best reporters, but in her last few weeks here, she became very secretive. She would come in early, leave late, and she stopped sharing information about her stories. I assumed she was protecting a big scoop. Did she mention the Adirondacks specifically? Chen hesitated. Actually, yes. About 2 weeks before she disappeared, she asked for time off to do field research upstate. Said she needed to interview sources who wouldn't talk over the phone. And you approved this? Rebecca had enough seniority to set her own schedule. I told her to check in daily, but Chen spread his hands helplessly. She never called. Marcus left the Tribune with more questions than answers. If Rebecca's editor didn't know about Project Mindbridge, who did? And why had she felt the need to hide her real investigation from her own newsroom? That evening, in his apartment in Brooklyn, Marcus listened to the rest of Rebecca's recordings. What he heard made him question everything he thought he knew about the case. October 13th, 2021. Second day of interviews in Lake Placid. I spoke with Margaret Sullivan, whose brother Thomas disappeared while hiking alone in 2018. According to Margaret, Thomas was an experienced outdoorsman who knew these woods intimately. The official report says he got lost and died of exposure, but Margaret insists that Thomas called her on his cell phone 2 days after he was supposed to be found dead. He told her he was somewhere they do tests and that he couldn't come home because they need to understand how the brain works when it's isolated. Marcus paused the recording. Thomas Sullivan. He looked up the case on his computer and found that Sullivan had indeed been declared dead, after a massive search and rescue operation found no trace of him. But there was no mention of any phone call in the official report. Rebecca's voice continued. I'm beginning to see a pattern in these disappearances. All of the missing persons were intelligent, educated individuals. Scientists, teachers, writers, engineers. All of them disappeared in remote areas of the Adirondacks. And in several cases, family members report receiving mysterious communications after the official searches were called off. The next recording was dated October 14th, just 1 day before Rebecca herself disappeared. I've made contact with Dr. Sarah Hoffman, a former researcher at Fort Detrick, who claims to have worked on psychological warfare projects for the military in the 1990s and early 2000s. Dr. Hoffman told me that Project Mindbridge was a classified program designed to study the effects of isolation and sensory deprivation on cognitive function. The goal was to develop interrogation techniques that could break down an individual's resistance to questioning without leaving physical evidence of torture. Marcus felt a chill. Fort Detrick was the U.S. Army's biological warfare research facility in Maryland. If Rebecca had been investigating military black ops projects, that would explain why her disappearance had been handled so quietly. According to Dr. Hoffman, the project was officially terminated in 2003, but she believes it continued under different names and different funding sources. She gave me the location of what she says is a research facility in the Adirondacks, disguised as a private retreat center. She warned me that approaching the facility would be dangerous, but I believe this is the key to understanding what happened to all those missing people. The recording ended abruptly, with the sound of what might have been a car door slamming. Marcus immediately tried to find information about Dr. Sarah Hoffman. What he discovered made his stomach sink. Dr. Sarah Hoffman had died in a car accident outside Washington, D.C. on October 16, 2021, the day after Rebecca Martinez disappeared. The next morning, Marcus called Ranger Walsh in the Adirondacks. Ranger Walsh, I need to ask you about something. In the area where you found the recorder, have there been any reports of unusual activity? Maybe a private facility that doesn't show up on maps? Detective, that's a funny question. About 10 miles from where we found the recorder, there's a place that locals call the Institute. It's supposedly some kind of corporate retreat center, but nobody around here has ever seen any corporate types going in or out. What do they see? Government vehicles mostly. Black SUVs with tinted windows. And the weird thing is, the facility doesn't show up on any of our official park maps, even though it's clearly within the park boundaries. Have you ever investigated it? We've tried, Detective. But every time one of my rangers gets close to the perimeter, they're met by security personnel who claim it's private property and that we don't have jurisdiction. Even though it's in a national park, that's what I keep saying. But apparently they have some kind of federal exemption that supersedes our authority. Marcus made a decision that he knew his superiors wouldn't approve of. He was going to drive up to the Adirondacks and take a look at this mysterious facility himself. The drive to Lake Placid took him through some of the most beautiful scenery in New York State, but Marcus was too focused on the case to appreciate the autumn foliage. He kept thinking about Rebecca's final recording, wondering what she had discovered that was worth killing for. He met Ranger Walsh at a diner in Lake Placid, and she agreed to guide him to the area where the recorder had been found. They hiked for about an hour through dense forest before reaching a ridge that overlooked a valley Marcus hadn't expected to see. Below them, nestled in what should have been pristine wilderness, was a complex of modern buildings that looked like a cross between a research facility and a minimum security prison. The buildings were connected by covered walkways, and the entire complex was surrounded by a high fence topped with razor wire. "There it is," Walsh said. "The Institute." Marcus studied the facility through binoculars. He could see several vehicles in the parking area, mostly black SUVs as Walsh had described, but also what looked like medical transport vehicles. More disturbing, he could see figures in white coats moving between the buildings. "How long has this been here?" "As far as I can tell, it was built sometime in the late 1990s, but like I said, it doesn't appear on any official documents." "Have you ever seen anyone go in or out who looked like they might be patients or prisoners?" Walsh was quiet for a moment. "Detective, about 2 years ago, one of my rangers saw a group of people being led from one building to another. They were all wearing identical gray clothing and they moved like they were heavily sedated." Marcus felt sick. If Rebecca had been right about Project Mindbridge, they were looking at a facility where people were being held against their will for psychological experiments. "Ranger Walsh, I need to get closer to that facility." "Detective, I can't officially help you with that, but I can tell you that there's an old logging road that runs along the east side of the valley. If someone were to hypothetically follow that road after dark, they might be able to get close enough to see what's really going on down there." That night, Marcus followed Walsh's directions and found himself crouched in the underbrush at the edge of the Institute's perimeter fence. Up close, the facility was even more ominous. The buildings had no windows except for narrow slits near the roof, and the lighting was harsh and institutional. As he watched, a door opened in the main building and 2 figures in white coats emerged, escorting a third person between them. The person being escorted moved with the shuffling gait of someone heavily drugged, and even from a distance, Marcus could see that they were wearing restraints. Marcus was reaching for his phone to document what he was seeing, when a voice behind him said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you, detective." He spun around to see 2 men in dark clothing pointing weapons at him. One of them was speaking into a radio. "We have the NYPD detective. Should we bring him in?" Marcus couldn't hear the response, but after a moment, the man nodded and looked back at him. "Detective Thompson, you're going to come with us and you're going to forget everything you've seen here tonight. I'm a police officer. You can't just..." "Detective, you're about 50 miles from the nearest jurisdiction that would recognize your authority, and you're trespassing on federal property. Now move." They escorted Marcus to the facility, where he was taken to a sterile white room that looked more like a medical examination room than an office. After a few minutes, a woman in a lab coat entered. She was in her 40s with graying hair and the kind of cold, analytical eyes that Marcus associated with career bureaucrats. "Detective Thompson, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Carter. I understand you've been investigating the disappearance of Rebecca Martinez." "How do you know that?" "We know a great deal about your investigation, detective, just as we knew a great deal about Ms. Martinez's investigation before she became problematic." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "You killed her." "Ms. Martinez is not dead, detective. She's here, participating in our research program, just as she has been for the past 3 years. That's impossible. She's been missing. She's been here the entire time, detective, helping us understand how the human mind processes information under controlled conditions. It's fascinating work, really. We've learned so much about memory, perception, and the malleability of consciousness." "Dr. Mai." Carter pressed a button on her desk and a monitor descended from the ceiling. On the screen, Marcus could see a figure in gray clothing sitting in what looked like a comfortable room. The person was writing in a notebook, and Marcus recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Rebecca Martinez, but she looked different. Her hair was shorter, her face was thinner, and there was something vacant about her expression. "As you can see, Ms. Martinez is quite well. She's been helping us document her experiences as part of our ongoing research into isolated cognitive environments. What have you done to her?" "We've simply provided her with a controlled environment where she can focus entirely on her writing without the distractions of the outside world. She's produced some remarkable work during her time here." Marcus realized with growing horror what he was looking at. You're brainwashing her. That's such a crude term, Detective. We prefer to think of it as cognitive restructuring. Ms. Martinez came here believing she was investigating a conspiracy. Now she understands that she's part of a valuable research project that will help improve interrogation techniques for national security purposes. This is torture. This is illegal. This is classified research conducted under the authority of the Department of Defense, Detective. What's illegal is your unauthorized surveillance of a federal facility. Doctor. Carter stood up and walked to the window, which looked out over the complex. Detective Thompson, you have a choice to make. You can join Ms. Martinez in our research program. I'm sure we could learn a great deal from studying the cognitive patterns of a law enforcement officer. Or you can return to New York City and forget that this conversation ever took place. And if I choose the third option, going public with what I've seen, there is no third option, Detective. At least not one that ends well for you. Marcus looked at the monitor where Rebecca was still writing, unaware that she was being watched. He thought about her family, her friends, her colleagues who had spent 3 years wondering what had happened to her. And he thought about all the other missing persons who might be trapped in this facility. What guarantee do I have that if I walk away, you won't come after me later? You have our word, Detective. As long as you never speak of what you've seen here, you'll be free to continue your life and your career. And Rebecca? What happens to her? Ms. Martinez will continue to participate in our research for as long as she provides valuable data. When her usefulness ends, she'll be relocated to a comfortable facility where she can live out her days writing her memoirs. Marcus understood the euphemism. Rebecca would be imprisoned for the rest of her life, her mind systematically destroyed by psychological experiments disguised as research. I need to think about this. Of course. You'll be our guest tonight while you consider your options. Marcus was escorted to a small room that was clearly designed to be a holding cell, despite its attempts to look like a dormitory. The door locked behind him, and he was alone with his thoughts. He spent the night trying to figure out a way to expose what was happening at the Institute without ending up as a test subject himself. By morning, he had a plan. When Dr. Carter came to see him, Marcus told her he had decided to cooperate. He would return to New York and forget about Rebecca Martinez and the Institute. In exchange, he wanted confirmation that Rebecca was unharmed and would remain unharmed. A wise choice, Detective. And yes, Ms. Martinez will continue to receive the best possible care. They released him at his car, which had been moved from the logging road to the facility's parking area. As he drove away, Marcus saw Dr. Carter watching him from the window of what was obviously the main administrative building. But Marcus had lied about his intentions. During his night in the holding cell, he had managed to conceal his backup recording device, a small digital recorder that he always carried in case his phone died during an interview. He had recorded his entire conversation with Dr. Carter. More importantly, he had memorized the GPS coordinates of the facility and had gotten a clear look at the license plates of several government vehicles. He had enough evidence to blow the Institute wide open. The problem was he needed help from someone with more authority than a New York City detective. Back in Manhattan, Marcus reached out to an old friend from his days in the military, Colonel James Walker, who now worked for the Defense Department's Inspector General's office. If anyone could investigate a classified military facility, it would be Walker. They met at a quiet bar in Brooklyn, where Marcus played the recording of his conversation with Dr. Carter. Walker's reaction was immediate and intense. Jesus Christ, Marcus, this is a black site, a domestic black site. Can you do something about it? I can try, but this is going to be complicated. If this facility is operating under classified authority, there are going to be people in very high places who want to keep it secret. James, there are American citizens being held prisoner and tortured in that facility, including a journalist who was just doing her job. I understand. Give me a week to make some calls and see what I can find out through official channels. A week later, Walker called Marcus with disappointing news. Marcus, I made inquiries about the facility you described. According to everyone I spoke with, no such facility exists. The coordinates you gave me point to undeveloped wilderness in the Adirondack Park. That's impossible. I was there. I saw it. I believe you. But officially, there's no record of any research facility in that area. No budgetary allocations, no personnel assignments, no paper trail of any kind. So what do? We go public. I have contacts at the Washington Post who specialize in investigative reporting on government overreach. If we can get them interested, they might be able to apply enough pressure to force an official investigation. But when Marcus tried to contact the reporters Walker had recommended, he discovered something disturbing. Every conversation he had about the institute ended the same way. The reporters would express initial interest, then call back a day or two later to say they had decided not to pursue the story. After the fourth reporter gave him the same response, Marcus realized what was happening. Someone was getting to these journalists, convincing them or threatening them to stay away from the story. He was on his own. Marcus decided to take a different approach. He would write up everything he knew about the institute and Rebecca's disappearance, make multiple copies, and distribute them to every media outlet he could think of. If he could create enough noise, someone would have to pay attention. But when he got home that evening, he found his apartment had been searched. Nothing obvious was missing, but someone had clearly been through his belongings. More disturbing, his laptop was gone, along with all of his notes about the Rebecca Martinez case. Marcus realized he was in danger. If they were willing to break into his apartment, they might be willing to do worse to keep him quiet. That night, Marcus slept in a hotel under a false name, paying cash and avoiding surveillance cameras as much as possible. The next morning, he drove to a small town in upstate New York and bought a prepaid cell phone. He used it to call Rebecca's sister, Maria Martinez, who lived in Phoenix. Ms. Martinez, this is Detective Thompson from the NYPD. I worked on your sister's missing person case. Detective, it's been 3 years. Do you have news about Rebecca? I need to ask you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Have you received any communications from your sister since she disappeared? Phone calls, emails, letters, anything at all? There was a long pause. Detective, about 6 months ago, I got a postcard from somewhere in upstate New York. It had Rebecca's handwriting, but the message was strange. What did it say? It said, I'm fine, the work is important, don't worry about me. But detective, Rebecca never used that kind of language. She would never tell me not to worry. She knew I'd worry no matter what. Do you still have the postcard? Yes, but detective, are you saying Rebecca might still be alive? Marcus made a decision that violated every protocol he'd been taught. Ms. Martinez, I believe your sister is alive, but she's being held against her will. I can't give you details over the phone, but I need you to be very careful about who you talk to about this conversation. What do you mean? I mean that there are people who want to keep your sister's location secret, and they might come after anyone who asks too many questions. 3 days later, Marcus received a text message on his prepaid phone. Stop looking or join her. He understood the message. If he continued investigating the institute, he would disappear just like Rebecca had. But Marcus couldn't stop. He thought about Rebecca, trapped in that facility, her mind being systematically destroyed by psychological experiments. He thought about all the other missing persons who might be suffering the same fate. He made one final attempt to expose the truth. Using a computer at an internet cafe in Queens, he created a detailed blog post describing everything he knew about the Institute and Project Mindbridge. He posted it to multiple platforms simultaneously, hoping that if the story spread widely enough, it would be impossible to suppress. For about 6 hours, the blog post was available online. Then, one by one, all copies were removed by the platforms, citing violations of community standards or potentially harmful misinformation. Marcus realized he was fighting an enemy with unlimited resources and the power to control information flow across the internet. He was beaten. That night, he sat in his Brooklyn apartment staring at the business card Dr. Carter had given him before he left the institute. On the back, she had written a phone number and the words, "When you're ready to stop fighting." Marcus thought about calling the number. He thought about accepting defeat and trying to forget everything he'd learned about Rebecca Martinez and Project Mindbridge. Instead, he did something else entirely. He drove to a storage facility in Queens and rented a unit under a false name. Inside that unit, he left a detailed written account of everything he knew about the institute, along with copies of Rebecca's recordings and his own documentation of the facility. He also left instructions for the contents to be delivered to specific journalists and government officials if he didn't renew the rental payment within 6 months. It wasn't much, but it was something. If the institute decided to silence him permanently, at least there would be a record of what had happened. Marcus returned to his regular duties at the NYPD, but he lived differently now. He varied his routes to work, checked his apartment for surveillance devices, and never discussed the Rebecca Martinez case with anyone. 6 months passed without incident, then a year. Marcus began to think that maybe the institute had decided he wasn't worth the trouble of eliminating. He was wrong. One evening in late 2024, Marcus received a package with no return address. Inside was a microcassette recorder, the same model Rebecca had used, along with a note that said simply, "Final recording." Marcus played the tape and heard Rebecca's voice, but it was different now, flat, emotionless, drained of the passion and curiosity that had characterized her earlier recordings. "This is Rebecca Martinez. Today is November 15th, 2024. I have been a resident of the Institute for 3 years, 7 months and 31 days. During this time, I have participated in a comprehensive research program designed to study the effects of environmental control on cognitive function and memory formation." Marcus felt sick. The woman on the recording sounded like Rebecca, but the words weren't hers. They were the clinical, detached language of someone who had been completely broken down and rebuilt according to someone else's specifications. "I want to thank Dr. Carter and her team for providing me with the opportunity to contribute to important scientific research. My work here has helped advance our understanding of human psychology in ways that will benefit national security for years to come." The recording continued for several more minutes, with Rebecca describing her daily routine at the Institute, her research projects, and her gratitude for being allowed to participate in such important work. It was a complete psychological transformation. The Rebecca Martinez who had recorded those initial investigations was gone, replaced by someone who had been programmed to believe that her imprisonment was a privilege. The final words on the recording chilled Marcus to the bone. "To anyone who might be listening to this, please understand that I am here by choice, and I am happy. Do not try to find me. Do not try to rescue me. I am exactly where I belong." Marcus understood the message. The Institute was showing him what happened to people who crossed them. Rebecca Martinez had been erased as a person and rebuilt as a propaganda tool. But there was something else in the package. A second note, written in what looked like Rebecca's original handwriting. "The storage unit. Tell my story." Somehow, despite everything that had been done to her, some part of Rebecca was still fighting. She had remembered his storage unit and was asking him to honor their unspoken pact, to tell the truth about what had happened to her. Marcus spent the next 3 months preparing for what he knew would be his final attempt to expose the Institute. He expanded the contents of the storage unit, adding more evidence and documentation. He made arrangements for the unit's contents to be automatically released to multiple journalists and government officials if he failed to check in for more than 30 days. Then, knowing it would almost certainly mean his death or disappearance, Marcus drove back to the Adirondacks. He didn't try to infiltrate the Institute this time. Instead, he positioned himself on the ridge where he had first observed the facility and began taking photographs with a telephoto lens. He documented the buildings, the vehicles, the personnel, everything he could see. As expected, security personnel found him within hours. But this time, Marcus was ready for them. "Detective Thompson," one of them said, "you were warned to stay away from this facility." "I know. And I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to make a deal." They brought him back to Dr. Carter, who seemed unsurprised to see him again. "Detective, I thought we had an understanding." "We did, but circumstances have changed. I've received new information about Rebecca Martinez that I think you should see." Marcus handed her a USB drive. "This contains evidence that Rebecca left behind before she was brought here. Evidence that she gave to someone else before she disappeared. Evidence that's going to be released to the media unless certain conditions are met." Dr. Carter examined the USB drive. "What conditions?" "I want to see Rebecca. I want to verify that she's alive and unharmed. And I want to guarantee that she'll continue to receive proper care. And in exchange, I'll give you the location of the evidence cache and the name of the person who has instructions to release it. You can neutralize the threat without having to kill me or make me disappear." "Doctor." Carter considered the offer. "Very well, Detective, you can see Ms. Martinez, but I should warn you that she's changed since you last saw her." They brought Marcus to a comfortable-looking room that was obviously designed to appear normal while actually being a sophisticated holding cell. Rebecca was sitting at a desk, writing in a notebook. When she looked up at Marcus, there was no recognition in her eyes. "Rebecca, do you know who I am?" She looked at him politely, the way someone might look at a stranger who had asked for directions. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met. Are you one of the new researchers?" "Rebecca, I'm Detective Marcus Thompson. I investigated your disappearance 3 years ago. I'm afraid there's been some mistake. I haven't disappeared. I've been living here at the Institute for as long as I can remember. I'm a research participant in a very important study." Marcus realized that Rebecca's memory had been completely altered. She genuinely believed that she had always been at the Institute, that her presence there was voluntary, and that her previous life in New York had never existed. Rebecca, do you remember working for the New York Tribune? Do you remember investigating Project Mindbridge? She looked puzzled. I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about. I've always been interested in psychology and research. That's why I volunteer for these studies. Marcus turned to Dr. Carter, who was watching the interaction with clinical interest. What have you done to her? We've simply helped her integrate her experiences in a way that's less traumatic for her psyche. Ms. Martinez came here in a state of extreme paranoia and delusion, believing in conspiracy theories and imaginary government programs. We've helped her achieve a more stable mental state. You've destroyed her mind. We've improved it, Detective. She's no longer troubled by false memories or irrational fears. She's at peace. Marcus looked back at Rebecca, who was already returning to her writing, having apparently forgotten that the conversation had taken place. The woman who had been one of New York's most tenacious investigative journalists was gone, replaced by a docile test subject who had no memory of her former life. Now, Detective, Dr. Carter said, about that evidence cache you mentioned. Marcus had lied, of course. There was no evidence cache beyond what he had already stored, and no mysterious third party waiting to release damaging information. But he had needed to see Rebecca one more time, to understand what the Institute was really doing to its prisoners. There is no cache, he said quietly. I just wanted to see what you had done to her. Dr. Carter's expression didn't change. I thought as much. Well, Detective, this does complicate things. You've seen too much to be allowed to leave, and you've demonstrated that you can't be trusted to honor agreements. So what happens now? Now you join our research program. I'm sure you'll find it as enlightening as Ms. Martinez has. Marcus was prepared for this outcome. As they escorted him to what would undoubtedly be his final holding cell, he thought about the storage unit in Queens. In 6 months, when his payment wasn't renewed, the contents would be automatically released to a list of journalists and investigators. It wasn't much, but it was the only justice Rebecca Martinez was likely to get. The storage unit contained everything: Rebecca's original recordings, Marcus's documentation of the Institute, photographs of the facility, and a detailed account of how the government was operating domestic black sites where American citizens were imprisoned and tortured in the name of national security research. Maybe someone would listen. Maybe someone would care enough to investigate further than Marcus had been able to. Or maybe the Institute's reach was too extensive, its protection too complete. But Detective Marcus Thompson had done everything he could to honor his commitment to a journalist who had disappeared while seeking the truth. And in a small storage unit in Queens, that truth was waiting for someone brave enough to tell it. The package of evidence would be delivered in 6 months. Until then, the story of Rebecca Martinez would remain a mystery. Another missing person case in a file drawer, another family wondering what had happened to someone they loved. In the Institute, Rebecca Martinez continued her writing, unaware that she had ever been anything other than a voluntary research participant. And Marcus Thompson began his own journey into the program that would eventually erase his memory of ever being a detective, ever investigating a missing person case, ever caring about justice. But somewhere in Queens, a storage unit held the truth. And truth, as Rebecca Martinez had once written in her notebook, has a way of surviving even when the people who discover it do not. Epilogue. 6 months later, the package arrived at the Washington Post newsroom on a Tuesday morning in spring. Inside were documents, recordings, photographs, and a detailed account of government black sites operating within the United States. The reporter who opened the package, Sarah Chen, had covered government overreach stories for 15 years. She had never seen evidence this compelling or this terrifying. Sarah spent 3 weeks verifying the contents of the package. The GPS coordinates led to a location in the Adirondacks that satellite imagery showed to be undeveloped wilderness. Phone calls to law enforcement agencies turned up no record of Detective Marcus Thompson working on any investigation related to missing persons in upstate New York. But the recordings were real, the photographs were authentic, and the evidence trail, while carefully obscured, was substantial enough to convince Sarah that she was looking at proof of domestic torture sites operating under the authority of the United States government. Sarah Chen began making calls. Within 48 hours, her editor received a visit from 2 men in dark suits who identified themselves as national security officials. They informed the editor that publication of the story would violate several federal laws related to the disclosure of classified information. The story was killed. Sarah Chen found herself reassigned to cover local political campaigns. The package was returned to sender, but there was no return address. In the Adirondacks, the Institute continued its work, studying the cognitive effects of isolation and control on the human mind. Rebecca Martinez continued writing in her notebook, recording her daily experiences as a research volunteer. Marcus Thompson learned to appreciate the value of the important scientific work being conducted at the facility where he now lived. And in New York City, family members and friends of missing persons continued to wonder what had happened to people they loved, never knowing that the answers lay in a place that officially didn't exist, protected by people who had the power to make truth itself disappear. But the truth was still there, waiting in the spaces between official denials and classified documents, waiting for someone with enough courage and enough power to bring it into the light, waiting for justice that might never come,